Welcome to Raging Moderates. I'm Scott Galloway.
And I'm Jessica Tarlov.
Jess, where are you today?
At the same place I always am. I'm at home in New York. Yeah. Well, at the Vox studio, so I'm in the financial district.
Oh, you went down
here.
See, you're a newbie.
I go there now.
Yeah, you're a newbie.
Yeah.
You're excited and ambitious to actually do the right things to haul down to what is arguably the most uninspiring part of Manhattan, to where my guess is they're paying Vox to occupy their office space. But they are very nice studios, and it's a lot of young people running around.
Yeah, I'm like middle-aged here, like 55 on a comparative basis.
You say that like it's really old. You realize your podcast
You
partner...
said middle-aged, and we're all gonna... Middle-aged isn't really middle, right?
Yeah,
because you're not gonna make it.
I'll be 55 in 5 years. Today, we're talking about Matt Gaetz withdraws from AG consideration. Gaetz. I'm happy he's like going into hopefully political oblivion just for that. Can't pronounce his name.
Something terrible is brewing, but yes.
That's right. More Trump cabinet picks. Great. Episode 2 of Dancing with the Stars, whether Modern Family or Family Guy, and the transgender bathroom ban in Capitol Hill. Can't believe we're talking about this. I can't. Anyways, here we are. I love legislation that is focused on one person. But
yeah, it's really fair.
Yeah, it's nice.
Doesn't give the game away.
It's a good look. But first, we want to remind you, that's right, it's that time in the show, to please follow our Raging Moderates podcast on your preferred platform. Please follow us. If you're listening on Apple, we know that about a quarter of you aren't subscribed. So don't be that person. Hit the follow button so you never miss an episode. We don't, quite frankly, we don't register in the rankings. We don't register in Google search. And most importantly, we do not get paid if we don't have people actually subscribe to our feed. So if you're enjoying the show, please follow our Raging Moderates podcast on your preferred platform. All right, enough of that. Thank you for enduring that. What are we talking about? Last week, Matt Gaetz lobbied hard on Capitol Hill for his confirmation, but by Thursday morning, Trump apparently called to let him know he didn't have the votes in the Senate. By the afternoon, Gaetz announced on social media that his confirmation had become a distraction, for him having sex with minors. A few hours later, Trump announced his new pick, Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, a Trump loyalist who has ties to Susie Wiles and Boris Epstein. These people got to get simpler fucking names. Epstein?
Yeah.
Epstein, Boris Epstein?
Yeah. Boris is no bueno. Yeah. No
bueno. Okay, Jess, as always, you're going to have to carry this show. What does this signal that there's some... Is there a limit? Is there an actual limit in the Trump administration that gets actually crossed the line here?
I guess that's a peachy read of all of this, though. I mean, when we were talking about it last week, the expectation was that this one wasn't going to get through, especially once there started being like the jockeying back and forth about whether they're going to release the ethics report, and then Trump, apparently, the transition team doesn't want anyone to undergo normal FBI checks, which is the usual procedure. They're like, we can do it with an outside firm, so I can hire, Barron to look at them, and then we'll see what's going on. But I never think it's as straightforward as it seems. I feel like the fact that Matt Gaetz said, I am not taking my seat. So he won re-election, and he could still, even though he resigned from Congress, he resigned from this Congress, not the next one. So the expectation was, well, maybe he's just going to go back to Congress, which would also help Mike Johnson out, that he doesn't have to have a few months down one further in his majority, because they can only lose, 1 to 3 votes per issue as it is. But then he says, I'm not going back to Congress. And that makes me think, like, what terrible thing are you going to do? But it was interesting. He said, there are already people that I know have a hardened position no to me: Mitch McConnell, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and then John Curtis, who will be the new senator from Utah, replacing Mitt Romney. And it made me think, are the other controversial picks not getting that kind of feedback? Or is Matt Gaetz the only one who doesn't want to go through this public airing of anything? Because I imagine that there are a few that are telling Pete Hegseth, I'm not into you, or RFK Jr. So what do you think?
I listened to the Daily podcast, and they were talking about Gaetz, and basically the reporter had done some work where he had found some of the evidence that was going to be included in the ethics report that the Republicans managed to squelch, saying that it should not come out now that he's no longer a member of Congress, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Let's spend a bunch of time looking at a report. And if Gaetz claims or is innocent as he claims, then I would imagine that the report would state that, and that he would want the report to come out. And so they effectively killed it coming out. What I've also heard is that he's planning to run for governor. This isn't a guy that these people don't have a gestalt where it's like, okay, they have evidence that I was having sex with minors. By the way, in related news, air hockey table sales have absolutely plummeted. He wasn't. This is the thing that absolutely strikes me. He wasn't worried about people finding out that there was evidence that he was having sex with minors. He wasn't worried about what people would think about him. He wasn't worried about his inability to be America's top cop with this type of clout. He was just worried he wasn't going to get the votes. In my view, this really represents a new low, that we have a government and we have people who would even entertain this type of nomination. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, and I'm not a historian. I'm trying to think of the last time there was a nomination that was this brazenly inappropriate, stupid, and insulting to America, and this general notion that when we elect people and they have the power of putting people in power, that there is some fidelity to decency, to the Constitution, to the actual goddamn job description. We just seem to be setting new lows every damn day. Anyways, that's my rant, Jess.
No, well, I think the problem is that the top of the ticket is what, or I should say, who shattered a lot of these norms to begin with. So why wouldn't the cabinet follow suit on that front? And there were all of these stories coming out about, past nominees that hadn't been able to get through, like under Bill Clinton, because they had an undocumented nanny. Like those were the days, right? When you just had someone who was, yes, here illegally, but was good enough to be taking care of your child, which is probably the most important job that we have, globally speaking. There's nothing more precious than your child and who you entrust them to be with for 10 hours a day or whatever you're doing. And that was ending nominations. And now we're having conversations about, like, how many minors is too many, or how many allegations of sexual assault is too many, how many brainworms, how many affairs and sex journals that ended up leading to suicides is too many. And I don't know, it makes me think a lot about what the Democrats are going to have to do, and this is one of the cases that people have been making, not because he behaves like this, but because he has this kind of swagger for a Gavin Newsom. There's this whole part of social media that talks about him as the psychopath we need, right? Like the guy who will just show up, is relentlessly on message, is fast on his feet, is so good looking, is so sharp. And I think there are going to be a lot of people that feel that way, that are going to feel scared away from a kind of more, normie pick, right? Like a guy who's just standing up there with his nice wife and his two kids, and doesn't have that kind of energy, because it's clear the Republican Party is feeding off of depravity at this point.
So, Jess, let's talk about Pam Bondi. Unlike Gaetz, who hasn't actively practiced law, she has real experience as Florida's Attorney General. She comes across as fucking Thurgood Marshall right now. Yeah, my sense is she's going to sail right through. What are your thoughts?
I think she will as well. It might, if there was some game of 3D chess going on to put Gates up to get someone else in, and a big sense of relief, this could have been it. I think Pam Bondi is not going to have any issues, as she was a prosecutor for a long time, first female AG in Florida, very, very competent. She's been in a lobbying firm called Ballard for the last several years, and Susie Wiles is a partner there. So she's a very good relationship with Susie Wiles, which is obviously a big part of this. She has ingratiated herself to Trump over the last 10 plus years. So in 2016, she actually endorsed Trump over Marco Rubio, which was a big deal that the Florida AG went for Trump versus the hometown hero, although I guess Mar-a-Lago has been in Florida. Um, the only, well, two things that I think are relevant. So she's very into this kind of same line of argumentation that Gaetz was making, which is I'm gonna investigate the investigators. I'm gonna weed out all of the bad guys, get rid of Jack Smith, his whole team. She's been talking like that. She actually went for Trump's claims of voter fraud in 2020. She even went to Philadelphia and gave a press conference about how messed up everything was going, the false claims of widespread voter fraud. The one kind of scandal, I guess, revolves around a 2013 political donation. So that's when that huge lawsuit investigating Trump University was going on, and all the state AGs had to sign on. And there were a lot of victims from Trump University in Florida, and Pam Bondi ended up not signing on and also got a $25,000 contribution from Trump's charity. So that will, I think, be the kind of fireworks in terms of the scandals, I guess, in her hearings. And the more normie Republicans, I think, will want to hear you're not just going to come in and do everything that he wants, especially considering the Supreme Court ruling about immunity for kind of everything. But in general, this looks like it's going to be absolutely fine, is my take. What about you?
Yeah, she, like I said, she feels, it's like something out of, SUV or one of those shows where the judges appear to be real judges. Um, I was kind of waiting for Judge Judy. I thought maybe she was up her AG at some
Not
point.
Judge Janine, my colleague. That was the other fun little rumor. If Gaetz was the cover and then Judge Pirro.
It literally at this point wouldn't have surprised me. I mean, this is nothing is off the table. It appears literally, and just with going back to Getz, let's be clear, Democrats have had their own struggles with scandal, and especially around. It used to be that Republicans stole and Democrats had affairs. Now just everybody's doing everything. It feels like, but infidelity, weirdness, scandal, that is not sequestered to the Republican Party. But I do think it's important that we discern between scandal and real criminal activity, such as
Mhm.
having sex with minors. And I got to believe that report, I can't believe it hasn't been leaked, was pretty damning. But
It'll be out,
you
I'm
think
sure.
so?
Yeah, Susan Wild, the ranking Democrat on the committee, has said as much. She was really upset that Republicans were leaking inside information from what was going on in the room. Um, I think that they're going to get it out, and I think that's probably why Gaetz thought, "I gotta get out of here because I'm not gonna be insulated from this." Um, One thing we haven't talked about, which is so central to all of this, and then I do wanna get to other nominees. He's picking everyone who's good on TV, and Pam Bondi has spent a lot of time on our airwaves on Fox. When you think about it, it's actually really smart if you can get qualified people who are also good on TV, that they can defend themselves and that they can defend you and not look like a deer in headlights every time they give an interview. A lot of people are dismissive of it, but I think it's actually a very good strategy.
Hmm. Says one of the co-hosts of the Five.
Well,
Okay, yeah.
I'm not getting picked for anything, but I'm just
Oh,
saying,
are you kidding?
well,
You look like Hillary Clinton at this point. You would be you would be the most qualified pick in the cabinet right now. You would, I mean, yeah, I don't. You would look
Liam
like Lloyd Benson with better hair. Anyway,
leading the
let's.
Trump derangement syndrome branch of the government. Um, anyway.
On that note, let's take a quick break. Stay with us. Okay, Jess, a few more cabinet announcements worth discussing. Howard Lutnick was tapped as Commerce Secretary, and Scott Bessent was picked as Treasury Secretary, which the markets like. Lynn McMahon, a longtime ally and donor, was named to lead the Department of Education. McMahon's background is light on education policy. Okay, as if that matters. And she also co-founded the World Wrestling Entertainment Federation with her husband. And the most surprising pick, Dr. Oz as the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Jess, what do you think? What are your thoughts on these picks?
Up and down, I guess. Linda McMahon, that's a tough one. She was in the first administration. She was definitely going to be somewhere here. She lied about having an education degree, which I feel like is a big lie if you're going to go be the head of the Department of Education, essentially, or education secretary. And there's we should also note there have been a number of lawsuits over the years, but there's even an open civil suit against the WWE that these abuse scandals involving boys as young as 12 years old, that the McMahons hired people, one guy in particular who they knew allegedly was an abuser and didn't do anything to stop it. They call it the quote unquote ring boy scandal. But abolishing the Department of Education is their talking point. I'm not sure that that happens. You need 60 plus votes to be able to do it. But what I think that they are going to try to do, and it sends a really important signal across the country and also to teachers unions, is to talk more about school choice and vouchers. And there are a lot of people, even on the Democratic side, who are so disappointed in the quality of our public education, and for good reasons. We just could keep falling further and further behind. Public schools really let American students, especially American students who are poorer, down during COVID, but not letting them back in the classroom, even though we knew that kids were not transferring, generally speaking, COVID to one another, and that it would have been safe because teachers didn't want to come in. And you see Democrats like Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, has supported vouchers. I think that that is the way of the future, and that Democrats
Mhm.
are going to really need to reckon with this. And Linda McMahon will be the face of pushing that forward.
I don't think there's any getting around it. They need a reformer, but this whole Doja, you know, over reductives thinking of let's just get rid of the Department of
Right.
Education, burn the village to save it. There are few investments, maybe outside of R&D or some science programs that show that are technically investments. Social Security is a cost. We've decided to tax young people, to transfer money to older people, to eliminate or attempt to eliminate senior poverty. And it has largely worked. I would argue it's become too expensive. And now seniors are the wealthiest generation in the history of the planet. There should be means testing. It should be pushed back. It used to be when Social Security was first invented, 80% of the people would never get it because they would die. Now more than 80% get it. And it used to be 12 to 1, people your age supporting people my age. Now it's 3 to 1. That is a cost. Department of Education is an investment. And you might argue that the investment is not getting the ROI it deserves because it is poorly allocated. And I agree with you around school choice. Competition works. There are some teachers, as someone who went through public schools all the way through graduate school, I remember certain components of my education, Emerson Junior High School, they were just warehousing us. There was 35 kids per class. I was there with the first year they integrated the school. So all of a sudden, out of a school of 1,500 kids, 600 black kids from Compton showed up after being on a bus for an hour. They were pissed off. And it wasn't a Hallmark movie. We all hated each other. Get this, Jess, we used to have black against white softball games, and the faculty allowed that.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah, we hated each other. Absolutely. It
Wow.
was everything integration was not supposed to be. That's the bad news. The good news was that by high school, something wonderful happened and we were all getting along. My two best friends one was a Mormon kid who ended up going to Stanford, and the other was a black kid who got a football scholarship to Linfield, I think, University in Oregon, who lived in Baldwin Hills, and his father was a minister. I mean, these two kids couldn't have been more different, except they were both really good kids. They were actually great role models for me. But anyways, my point is, it was absolutely awful. And I remember the teachers were so overwhelmed, just trying to keep a lid. 35 kids, sometimes 38 kids per class, and all my friends, my nice white friends, quote unquote, air quotes, their parents pulled them out of school immediately when integration started and stuck them in this hippy dippy private school called Windward. And I remember it was one of the first moments where I thought, oh, things are different for me and my mom. Because I went home and said, oh, I need to go to Windward. And she's like, sit down. We don't go to private schools. The Department of Education, in addition to I think it's Title I, where they ensure that schools in rural poor areas get the funding they need to deliver an adequate education, they also are responsible for Head Start. And they also, I'm here with you now because of the Department of Education, or specifically Pell Grants. And that is Pell Grants, basically, if you're in the lower third of income earning homes, you get free, you get money, not even loans, which also student loans, the Department of Education oversees, which I believe it needs drastically reforming, and I'll come back to that. But I could not have gone to UCLA without Pell Grants. And this makes my point while also giving me the chance to do my favorite thing, and that is boast. I pay a lot of taxes. These Pell Grants are an investment that pay off. I think if there are a few things that you could look at and think a dollar invested in education, well delivered, I'm not saying there isn't reform that's required, not only gets you additional incremental income because you can occasionally produce people who do really interesting things, go into teaching themselves, start businesses, create tax revenue, but you avoid a lot of costs because without an educational system, you're going to end up paying for these folks one way or another, whether it's through incarceration, mental health, homelessness, welfare, food stamps, unemployment. So the Department of Education is arguably the place where you're going to get the greatest return on your investment if it's handled well. It sort of is depressing, although I guess you could argue her background. She was, I believe, head of the Small Business Administration. So
Yeah.
maybe, I mean, she strikes me as a competent woman.
Mhm.
That she's the least or one of the least bad picks, but I wish they would stop this bullshit notion that we're just going to get rid of the Department of Education. And what's interesting, or I find interesting, I interviewed a guy named Rory Stewart, who's the co-host of The Rest is Politics, he was a former member of Parliament, really bright guy, was actually the private tutor for Princes Harry and William. And he said when Brits look at America, they can't quite figure out the following, and that is we absolutely under prioritize and don't talk about K through 12 education. And we have some of the worst K through 12 education in the world of the G7. But at the same time, we have amazing graduate schools. And at the same time, we keep figuring out a way to grow the economy. And he acknowledged that maybe that's the way the natural order of an economy is you have shitty schools and it's like a Hunger Games, and then they get to go to the best universities. And that struck me as a very upsetting rubric or lens through which to look at education. But maybe that's because there's no doubt about it. K through 12 were awful, and yet our economy continues to grow like crazy. But anyways, your thoughts on the Department of Education?
I think it's important, and I hate, whether Doge is effective or not, the sweeping talking points about doing away with things that need help or need tender loving care is silly and reflects poorly upon you and is not how people run their businesses either. I understand Elon came in and ran Twitter a bit like that, but they've been losing a lot of money, even though now it's a bastion for free speech slash the worst place I've already ever hung out in my life. Um, it reflects a lack of seriousness about this and a lack of care and concern for your core constituency because guess what? A lot of people who don't make a ton of money voted for Donald Trump, and guess what? They use the public school system. They don't have other options to go to a private school. The lottery system for getting into charters, you know, might not get lucky and get to do that. And so I think that they would be a lot more convincing as serious folks if they took a different line of argumentation about what they're going to do with the Department of Education, including making sure that people do have access to vouchers in more circumstances. I think that that is important, and you should be able to give people those options, certainly with religious schools, because, Catholic schools stayed open through the entire pandemic. That was something that they had going for them, and I understand why people want that. There's an aspect also to what McMahon will be overseeing, and he talked about this throughout the campaign, and I do think it is important. So, they could essentially transfer responsibility for accrediting universities to for colleges to the states. And Trump has been talking about things like if your university isn't letting Jewish kids go to class or get into the dining hall or get to the Hillel or the Chabad on campus, we're coming after you. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing to be tinkering around with that or to at least be using it as a threat. They've also said as a cudgel, if you have DEI policies or if you're using affirmative action, and the universities are smart enough that they can get to whatever form of affirmative action they think they need to without it sending up flags in that way. But what do you think about the approach of threatening these universities more if they are not treating each student as equal? Like if they're not treating kids from one group like they would if they were Black, for instance, or if they were LGBTQ plus.
Well, look, I said this early on. If I went to Royce Hall or the Quad near Royce Hall at UCLA, or I went down to my universities in front of my building at NYU, and I held up a Confederate flag and I passed out bands to white kids, and the black kids or the kids without bands couldn't enter the university, they would have called in the fucking National Guard. But what was clear coming out of this zombie apocalypse of useful idiots on campus and the faculty that supported this bullshit and some fucked up perverted means of virtue signaling or trying to show their sort of woke chops. I don't know what was going through their minds. What was clear was that free speech is never freer when it's hate speech against Jews. And this was a really low moment for universities. And I advise the regents of the University of California, and we did a couple calls over the summer, and they said, okay, they were very worried about fall. What happens if this flares up again? And I thought the solution was pretty easy. If there are if there are students who are protesting or putting up anything resembling an encampment, and it turns to hate speech, or they try and build, basically they tried to build a mini city, if you will. They were trespassing. You ask them to clear the area. You give them 15 minutes. You warn them they will be punished. You expel the first 6 or 12 students that violate this. And when word gets out that shit's just got real and you may have to call your folks and say, hey, mom, dad, you're spending $50,000 a year for me to get expelled for hate speech, this will stop right away. And then the thing that didn't get much press that I have no tolerance for is I think you cut a 19-year-old a pretty wide berth. You're supposed to be stupid when you're 19. And sometimes that stupidity moves society forward, whether it was the protests on campus against Vietnam or Iraq. Sometimes kids are meant to push the boundaries, and sometimes they're thinking more forward and more correctly than, their parents. You cut them a wide berth, who I think should have absolutely been summarily fired with a faculty that showed any empathy for this genocidal death cult. And there are still faculty at the University of California who put out exceptionally vile tweets, said they were inspired by the activities of October 7th, who are still showing up at the faculty cafeteria. And most of them, it ends up, can't teach their way out of a paper bag and do irrelevant research, but are in this ridiculous guild that is nothing but student debt called tenure. So there not only needs to be reform up and down, in K through 12, there needs to be reform in schools. And specifically, the first place I would start is that all universities should be on the hook for a quarter or a third of bad student loan debt. Because what's really mendacious about my industry is a really good kid shows up and he meets with a woman who's in a nice pantsuit who has a big college logo behind her, and she says some bullshit like this: education is an investment in yourself. Here, sign this paperwork for $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 in student loans. And then the kid, like many kids, finds out that he or she is not cut out for college, leaves without the certification of college, but gets to keep that debt, which is not dischargeable in bankruptcy, one of the few forms of debt that is not. And it haunts this person the rest of their life. The most dischargeable form of debt in history should be student loans. And instead, because my colleagues wake up every morning and ask themselves, how do I reduce my accountability while increasing my compensation? I'll access cheap credit. And if I don't deliver on my promise and the kid gets nothing for the money that's been lent to them, I'm not on the hook for it. So if you put colleges on the hook for 10, 20, 30% of bad student debt, they'd stop loaning someone getting a fucking philosophy degree from Joey Bag of Donuts University to go be a barista. It's like a lot of these student loans, people getting their student loans, I'm like, wow, that might take you from 4 stars to 5 stars on Uber. So my industry needs radical reform, but the notion that you're going to get rid of the Department of Education is, again, another key theme in what appears to be, I guess it's both parties are guilty of it. Let's optimize America for the top 10% at the cost of the bottom 90. The top 10%, they're right, doesn't need the Department of Education. My kids don't need the Department of Education. They won't benefit from it. It's the other 90. And just looking at it purely economically, it's an investment that saves money over the year. Okay, that was enough of my rant. Let's listen to what Trump said about the Department of Education.
And one other thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children because they'll do a much better job of it. You can't do worse. We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're absolutely at the bottom. We're one of the worst. So you can't do worse. We're going to end education coming out of Washington, D.C. We're going to close it up, all those buildings all over the place, and you have people that in many cases hate our children. We're going to send it all back to the states. Thank you very much.
Dr. Oz, as the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, it's laughable in the TV doctor sense and all the fad diets and all the quackery. I thought it was hilarious. There was a peer-reviewed piece in a British medical journal that picked 40 random episodes of his show and found that his health recommendations were based on evidence just 46% of the time, which is pretty shitty for a doctor. But what he does plan to do that is really dangerous is to work towards privatizing Medicare, to move us towards Medicare Advantage, which is what mostly people who are 80 plus are on. And the costs are enormous when you use Medicare Advantage. And he has talked about bringing that to younger Medicare users, 66 million people on Medicare, including my mother and my dad. It saw him through cancer. Most unbelievable coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any Dr. Oz feelings?
Yeah, so I have a bias. I've been
You like him?
I've been friends with Mehmet and Lisa Oz for 25 years, and I find Mehmet
We
to
got
be
some bias.
Yeah, it's a huge bias, and I'm going to disclose it. I mean, I know him in just a variety. He was literally taking hearts out of cadavers and putting them into other people. He's a cardiothoracic transplant surgeon, and he's a real dude. And what I would say about Mehmet, we don't share political views, but I've decided to separate the person from the politics, and this person is a really good man. And when he was contemplating positions like this, when he was running for Senate, he's really thoughtful, and he knows we have different politics. And so he would call me and ask me for my view on things. And I say that because it makes me feel important, but also it reflects well on him. Dr. Oz, he's a real dude. This guy was saving lives for, to become a cardiothoracic transplant surgeon. You're not doing what I was doing at 22, and that is making bongs out of household items and listening to Led Zeppelin and REM. This is a real dude who worked very hard. A lot of people trusted him with their lives. And also, I can say on a personal basis, when we talk about all this lack of character, whether it's Gaetz or Mace, Mehmet is a high character person. And I know he got a lot of grief for being for not respecting the science around some of these supplements and, how blueberries can save your life. He got blowback that he deserved for that. But this is a good man. And you want to talk about some of the bullshit around Gaetz and infidelity. He's been married for, I think, close to 40 years, wonderful father. And the first thing he did when he got this, I congratulated him. And he called me and said, give me your views on Social Security. He really wants to go deep here and really try and be thoughtful and helpful. So,
will he be a friend of the pod?
Oh, Mehmet will come on anytime. And by the way, the most pushback I have ever received across anything I've ever done is when I had Dr. Oz on my podcast. He triggers,
maybe not.
He triggers so many medical professionals. And what I can tell you is that he is a good man. And regardless of whether you agree with his politics or not, he will try and do the best thing for constituents. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Oz as a man. He's a good man.
Okay. I'm good with that. And then someone who you may not know, but I know personally because we have 9 Fox personalities that are going to go into the administration thus far, is Dr. Jeanette Neshwat. And I wanted to mention this. She's for Surgeon General. She's a real deal doctor. And you can see that she's being taken apart online for believing in vaccines, for participating in, you remember those like hand washing trends where doctors were like doing TikToks and stuff of how to make sure that you keep your hands clean. She has called vaccines safe and effective. It will keep you off the ventilator, keep you from passing away. And not only do I just like her personally, but I hope that this is a signal, and Dr. Marty McCary as well, who's at Johns Hopkins, who's coming in for the FDA, that there will be some hard science people in there. They're calling her Dr. Fauci in heels. I am thrilled.
That's great. All right, Jess, we have one more quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Over in the House, Congresswoman Nancy Mace introduced a resolution to ban trans women from using women's restrooms and locker rooms on Capitol grounds. Thank God for Representative Mace. Thank God, specifically targeting incoming Congresswoman Sarah McBride. This is a shift for Mace, who once supported LGBTQ rights. Speaker Mike Johnson supported Mace, emphasizing single-sex facilities. McBride responded, saying she's focused on lowering costs for Delaware families, not bathroom debates, and she hopes colleagues will see value in her work. What do we
Nancy
think of
Mace
Representative
sucks.
Mace?
She's awful. And she had so much promise. When she came into Congress, she seemed like she was part of like the normie caucus, said like, I'll stand up to Trump when that's the right thing to do. I'll always be on the side of South Carolinians. And now she's just high off of getting as many likes and retweets as possible. These videos that she's posting are embarrassing for her. And when I don't know who started saying it during the first Trump administration, but the cruelty is the point. The cruelty is the point here. You have been in Congress for a while. If you were concerned about someone being in your bathroom, you could have brought this up, because there are people who come in and out of Congress, right? This isn't about so the members have their own private bathrooms. And I'm sure that Sarah McBride will be using that, or there are gender neutral restrooms. But Nancy Mace showed no evidence that anyone was a threat, right? No one's been attacked, God forbid. She hasn't been made to be uncomfortable. And she is herself a rape survivor. And she talks about that regularly and the implications of being sexually assaulted. But I see no correlation to this, except that you want to rile people up and take advantage of, frankly, the level of misinformation that's out there about trans people. And I wanted to mention this to you. So YouGov had new survey work out about how Americans overestimate the size of minority groups and underestimate the size of majority groups. They think there are 21 times more trans people in America than there are, 27 times more Muslims, 15 times more Jews, and 2 more times immigrants. So there's this fallacy out there that, kids are going to school and coming home with different junk, that everyone that you pass on the street is a trans person. And that's someone like Sarah McBride, who I think has been so magnanimous and taken the high road to a level that I never could, is the threat in all of this. It really grosses me out.
Yeah, let's listen to a clip of McBride's response.
I didn't run for the United States House of Representatives to talk about what bathroom I use. I didn't run to talk about myself. I ran to deliver for Delawareans. And while Republicans in Congress seem focused on bathrooms and trans people, and specifically me, I'm focused on rolling up my sleeves, diving into the details, setting up my office, and beginning the hard work of delivering for Delawareans on the issues that I know keep them up at night.
I'd like to see 2 classes that are mandatory, or 3. I'd like to be secretary. I'd be the most qualified secretary of education in, let me think, 18 months. So effectively, there needs to be a class on adulting. My kid can do integers, but he doesn't understand the interest rate on his credit card. I think there needs to be part of an adulting class to teach young people, especially young men, how to express romantic interest while making the other person feel safe. In basic kind of life skills, I'd like to see a class on communications where it says, all right, storytelling, you have to understand mediums and how to communicate your ideas. I'd also like a course in critical thinking, because there are different levels of mendacious fuckery. Infidelity is one thing, all right? Scandal or abusing, if you will, or taking advantage of a White House intern, that's worse. That's worse, in my opinion, than having sex or relationships outside of your marriage. And then in an entirely different fucking universe is having sex with minors. These are not the same thing. And the problem is the populace goes, oh, it's just scandal. It's just scandal. No, it's not. There is a difference. And when people correctly say, in my view, or I think it's a point worth arguing, that I didn't have the height nor the body mass to play collegiate level basketball or football. I was born with or without certain attributes that disqualified me from playing certain sports. I think there is a solid argument that if you are born with a penis, it disqualifies you from playing women's sports or girls' sports. I think that is a honest, thoughtful discussion we should have. Passing legislation that is meant to do nothing but attempt to weirdly shame or show how anti-trans you are by saying to an elected member of Congress, you cannot use the same bathroom as me, it's just, that's a different level of mendacious fuckery. And my fear is there's so many points of weirdness coming out of DC that they all get grouped into the same level of mendacious. They're not. And kids need, and young adults and adults need to understand that your whole point or our advantage of a species is that we see different shades of gray. And when they turn very dark, or when they're worth a discussion, or we should just have a gag reflex. But this is my fear. And that is, we now live in an attention economy, and it doesn't matter how stupid or how mean the content is that created attention for you, it pays off. And that she is now a Republican, a rising Republican star, because she's a leader. Representative Mace, she's our woman. No, she's not. She's a mendacious, weird woman who is taking her precious capital and resources to actually do good things for her district, to just be blatantly hostile and mean towards an individual.
I agree with all of that. And I think that it's the beginning of potentially having electoral consequences. And this is what Democrats want, right? They want Republicans to take the mask off, essentially, and to expose themselves for being people who live by the cruelty is the point. And if you remember the North Carolina bathroom bill controversy, this did not go well for Republicans. This is not their concerns. Biological men in women's sports is their concern. That's 70% of Americans think that Leah Thomas had no business being in that pool with those girls as a competitive swimmer. But they don't care about using the bathroom. Now, there are some people who do. I get that. I see them in my Twitter feed. Hello, I see you. But in general, no one is concerned about Sarah McBride. And you notice it's only Marjorie Taylor Greene that's been running around screaming about this alongside Nancy Mace. And if that's your wing woman for something like this, you know that you're probably doing something wrong. And, people who worked in Nancy Mace's office are destroying her online over this and saying there's more to come about how terrible this woman is. But I think it's just so ugly. And I don't know, good on Sarah McBride for being such a big person to be able to rise above, because I would really struggle, and I'd probably also just be in a mess of tears all the time if people were talking about me like this and recording videos like that, and you have to go and sit on the House floor with them.
I'm a mess of tears regardless. But I do think the Democrats invited some of this bullshit by being so insane on some of these issues. I go back to the women's cycling race in North Carolina, where a transgender woman, Austin Killips, who was 27, basically finished 5 minutes before anyone else on a 137-mile-long race. And the woman who had been born a woman, who had been training her whole life, came in second. She should have won it. And then immediately the far left started talking about, all these basically was scared to come out and say, this is ridiculous. This is insane. And then the pictures of this transgender woman. And by the way, she deserves to present herself. And I do think there's some nuance here. If you're on a school board, I know I was on the board of my kid's school. And if a transgender girl wanted to play volleyball in the 9th grade, for God's sakes, there's a lot of really good people out there. I think the majority of the parents, I'd like to think, would say, if this helps this person, then, welcome to the volleyball team. But when it comes to scholarships, when it comes to real accoutrements, rewards, the ability to attend a university, the ability to make money, the ability to win gold medals, to go to the Olympics, sorry, folks, you're born a man, you're disqualified from that type of competitive level of athleticism. And the Democratic Party stood there like a deer in the headlights, immediately going, no, we've decided that we're so fucking crazy sometimes. The
problem is no, they didn't. It's actually worse than saying we decided that it's fine. They said nothing. That's how all of this became a big problem, and why someone like Seth Moulton is in hot water for saying that he doesn't want his daughters competing against biological males, no matter how they are living today.
I was seen as transphobic. I came out and said it was ridiculous that they let this transgender woman compete in this bike race, and I was called transphobic and hateful. And it's like, no, what I didn't get is where feminists were. Let me get this. Where does this all go? if we allow this, it means that every dollar, medal, and scholarship ends up only going to people born with penises? So where were the feminists? I just didn't get this.
Well, that was Martina Navratilova has been screaming about this for a long time.
Ridiculous.
And I mean, there have been, and I know Kara has spoken about this before as well. I mean, there have been evolutions within the LGBTQ plus movement that have shoehorned out certain groups, like OG groups, like gay men and lesbians, and, moved to a different place than perhaps they didn't think they were going. And I think that not saying things that are common sense, not reverting to the mean of, does this make sense, is part of the problem. And maybe there is some truth to, I have colleagues who will say, well, this is because you don't think about competition the same way that we do, because you get participation trophies for everything at your little liberal schools or whatever. But I know well enough the difference between, like you said, a kid in middle school who wants to play volleyball and collegiate level sports where you get scholarships, and certainly professional level sports where it is your livelihood. And I think that if Kamala had come out, and again, I think it was a fundamentals election, couldn't win against the inflation and people's feelings about the economy. But if she had come out after that, the Charlemagne ad was cut, which was a trans ad, but also an economic ad, right? Like, our money, your tax dollars are going to something that is niche and that you don't approve of. Just come out and say that is not the position of the Democratic Party. Maybe some of those late deciders would have felt differently about us, that we weren't out of our minds, whether that's, because some of our loudest voices, like John Oliver did a whole monologue about it last weekend or 2 weeks ago, and he's gotten a lot of blowback. Jen Psaki has spoken about it and said, oh, well, what's the big deal? The big deal is it ruins competition, and it's not fair. Like, it can't be both things, that a man can't be inherently scary if you run into him in a dark alley, and also that it's fine in competition against biological women.
What do you think of this idea? Elon Musk buying MSNBC. Oh, why does that make me happy, Jess? That makes me happy.
Really?
What do you think? Yeah, I think it'd be fucking hilarious to have Stephanie Ruhle and Rachel Maddow, like, every night meet each other to smoke cigarettes and eat ice cream and talk about Elon Musk being their new boss. I find it funny.
But would they still be there? Like, what are the implications of something like that?
The 7-year-old white women got to find another show to listen to. I think MSNBC is quickly becoming irrelevant.
I think they're doing that already, which is the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, what is this spinoff? I realize you've been discussing it on your other shows, but what is the spinoff of this? I mean, they're calling it now a well-funded startup. What is the future of MSNBC?
All of these things are going to be rolled up into a bad bank structure. Comcast has started it. These can be really good businesses. They're shrinking businesses, but they spin off a ton of cash flow. What you need is a different approach where you cut costs faster than revenue growth. They can still be really good businesses. This is the pivotal moment, in my opinion, or as it relates to the intersection between politics and media, is that you're going to see, a really good show gets 1 million viewers on MSNBC, average age 70, mostly white women. Those folks know what they buy, know what they don't buy, and they know who they're voting for and who they're not voting for. So advertisers and political campaigns are going to take all of that money and put it into yours truly, into podcasts where the average age is 34. It's mostly male. Those people are up for grabs because they're more about the economy, and economics are a much more dynamic situation. It kind of pings back Democrat, Republican on who they think will be better for them economically. But these companies are now distressed assets. They are melting ice cubes. I know a lot of people at MSNBC. The anchors are like pilots in the 70s. They're hugely prestigious. People like them. They're banging stewardesses, but they're pilots for Pan Am. They know their numbers are limited. They know that in about 10 years, they're going to be flying Amarillo to Dallas for Spirit Airlines at $68K a year. These are really declining assets. They can still make a lot of money. They still get incredibly talented people, but it's going to be, this is a series of distressed assets that'll be rolled up into one big conglomeration where they can cut costs faster than their revenue declines. But anyways, back to this. I just think it's fucking hilarious, the idea that Elon Musk would buy MSNBC. Let him do it. Revenue's down 80%. Everyone would leave, or everyone of any talent would leave, and he was trying to make it into something else. I don't know. I got to be honest. I think it would be fucking hilarious. Your thoughts?
I don't know. I feel bad because I like a lot of the people at MSNBC, and I feel like
talented
having Elon
people.
Musk as your boss is the worst.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. I mean, listen, Fox is up. Like our viewership is through the roof since the election and the lead up to the election. And I hope that that continues because I want to be able to pay for my kids to go to the Big Apple Circus as many times as possible. But
That's
I
called Raging Moderates. It's
is
called
that what it is?
podcasting.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Okay, help me out.
You literally
Subscribe.
you are the economic bellwether here. Right now, a 34-year-old Jess Tarlov has more options than almost any
I'm
person in
40.
media right now, and you chose a podcast with the dog. That's right. That says it all. You could have literally been prime time, and don't lie to me. You could have been prime time MSNBC, and you decided to do this Joy Bag of Donuts podcast. Because here's the thing. We're going like this. This is me making a hand signal up.
I hope
And
you're watching the YouTube
MSNBC,
version. We're going up.
even your good friends at Fox, I mean, I used to say the tallest midget, and then I found out that all Democrats think that's hateful. You're the fastest tortoise. That's the more politically correct
Cute.
way to saying. Yeah, you're the
All right.
fastest tortoise. But anyways,
I don't mind that. What happens? I mean, a lot of people will leave, obviously, but I do think that there's a real problem with the psyche of the average MSNBC viewer, that they're like losing their minds that Joe and Mika would even have a conversation with
why
President-elect
was
Donald
that
Trump.
bad?
And
Great point. I didn't think it was that
it's
bad.
insane to me. Like, don't you want any access also to the
We're
most
just supposed to hate
powerful man in the world?
100%. They did the right
Like, just be
thing.
craven about it. And yeah, if they don't want to get audited, yeah, same. I don't want to get audited. And they have probably more interesting stuff going on in their tax returns than I do. Like, you should go and kiss the ring. And that is the thing about having an entertainer as the president. He appreciates it. If you show up and you say, "Oh, Donald, you're a beautiful color today.
Yeah.
How do you keep your hair intact?" Whatever. He's going to like
What
you and
orange is
probably
that?
leave you alone.
Yeah.
What shade of orange
Yeah.
is that?
That's it for this episode. Thank you for listening to Raging Moderates. Our producers are Caroline Shagrin and David Toledo. Our technical director is Drew Burrows. You can find Raging Moderates on its own feed every Tuesday. That's right, Raging Moderates on its own feed. Please go there and
Did
subscribe.
you hear us?
Its own feed. Please follow us wherever you get your podcast. Just have a great rest of the week.